Hi guys, today we're going to learn a little bit more about the respiratory system, so let's get on with it. I'm going to start off first by labelling this diagram. So as you can see, it's shown as just a respiratory system. As usual, the diagram is a person facing us, okay? So this is their right hand side and this is their left hand side. So this is the right hand side and this is the left. Remember, they're facing us. Okay, so here we go. First bit, straightforward enough. Number one is the nose. Two, no guesses there, it's the mouth. Number three, okay, this thing here is called the trachea. You may say the trachea, I don't know, but I call it the trachea. Number four is where the trachea branches off, and this is called a bronchus. And this one is on the right, so it's the right bronchus. This will be the right lung. And this here will be the alveoli. Okay, or if there's one, it's an alveolus. On the other side here, we have the pharynx. This here is our larynx or voice box. Here would be the left bronchus. This would be the left bronchiole, or just a bronchiole. Bronchiole. And then this here is a muscle called the diaphragm. Okay, so the air comes in through the nose or the mouth, goes through the pharynx, larynx, down the trachea, and then it branches to either the right or the left bronchus. Whichever bronchus it goes through, it then goes through these little bronchioles till eventually it ends up at the alveoli. Okay, so what do all these parts do? Let's take a look. So I'm going to move it back down. Okay, here we go. So air enters through the mouth and the nostrils and is filtered by hairs, so it gets all the particles out and mucus. And it's warmed and humidified, so it's made a little bit moist. And it's sampled for odours as it flows through the nasal cavity. So the odours are the messages that we send to the brain to say, hey, this gas isn't right. So it's a bit of a warning system. Air moves progressively through narrower and narrower tubes of the lungs, and it follows the following route. So let's look at it. Okay, so we start off with the pharynx, and this is a membrane-lined cavity. It's behind the nose and the mouth. So, membrane lined cavity behind the nose and mouth. Once we pass through the pharynx, we get to the larynx. Okay, now at the bottom here, there's that flap door called the epiglottis, okay? And when you swallow food, okay, the epiglottis snaps up to stop food going down the trachea, okay? Because you don't want food going down there and blocking your lungs because you'll choke. So we have the glottis. So this is a hollow, muscular tube, and it forms, or forming, an air passage to the lungs. To the lungs. And it also holds the vocal cords. Now these vocal cords vibrate as air passes through them, okay, and that's how we get our sounds. So now we've been through the pharynx and we've been through the larynx. Now we're really getting into it, okay? We're really getting into the actual lungs themselves. So let me move it up just a tad. There we go. Okay. So the trachea, this is the tube that leads down to the lungs, okay? So it's a tube leading down to the lungs. And it's lined with rings of cartilage. Okay, that cartilage stops it from collapsing. Okay, so it keeps its structure, because you don't want, when the pressure drops, for it to collapse, because obviously that would be bad. Okay, so here we are, there are rings of cartilage. These reinforce the trachea and prevent it from collapsing. Okay, and it does add just a tiny little bit of flexibility, but you don't want a lot. So reinforce the trachea to prevent it collapsing. Also adds a bit of flexibility. Can't fit it in. Okay, now we also have smooth muscle down here, and this allows the air to be expelled with a bit more force, okay, because it gives it a bit of a thrust. So it allows air to be expelled with more force. Okay, and there goes the dog. Okay, so then we have bronchi. These are just smaller branches that go to each lung. So these are smaller branches. She'll stop in a minute. Leading to each lung. Now, once we've branched to our bronchi, okay, one to each lung, they keep going and they get smaller and smaller till we get to our bronchioles. And so these are just basically smaller branches of the bronchi. So you've got to think of it like a tree, okay? You start off with a big trunk, then we get the big branches, then we get the tiny branches, and then we're going to have these little twigs, till eventually we get to the actual ends, okay? And that's the alveoli. Okay, so the alveoli, one of them would be an alveolus. So alveolus. So the alveoli are small air sacs. Okay, so this is where the gas exchange happens. So small air sacs. And the important thing is they are 1 cell thick. Okay, because we want diffusion to happen super fast. So 1 cell means it can get in and out quick. And there is a site of gas exchange. With a G. Okay, so CO2 out, O2 in. Okay, so that's basically that part of. Okay, so let's look at the next part. And I want us to look now at the actual alveoli itself, or the alveolus, depending on how you want to say it. Okay, so here we have it, the alveoli. Right, so the alveoli, or the alveolus, is a single layer of flattened cells, so the diffusion distance is small. So really, it's like everything else, from what we keep saying. Surface area to volume ratio. Smaller surface area to volume ratio means we can get things in and quickly. They're covered in a dense network of capillaries that maintain a concentration gradient. So basically, this is what's happening. We have our air sac, our alveoli. It's 1 cell thick, as you can see, okay, and then running right next to it is our 1 cell thick capillary. So basically the oxygen and the carbon dioxide can jump in and out super fast because there's hardly any distance whatsoever. Okay, now the important thing for us is basically we have these 2 different types of cell, type 2 and type 1. and they are called pneumocytes. So the cells in the alveoli are called pneumocytes. Pneumocytes. We have two types. We have type 2 and type 1. Okay, so what do these things do? Well, as you can see, what's going to happen here, and I've got my little red pen, is we are going to have CO2 in the blood. And the CO2 wants to jump through. Meanwhile, the oxygen that's coming in from the air is going to jump through here. So this is where we're getting our gas exchange. Okay. Now the two different cells do two different jobs. The type 1 cells are have this high volume surface area to volume ratio to make diffusion super quick, and their basic job is to get things in and out. Okay, so this is just gas exchange, it's diffusion, concentration gradients. However, our type 2, which looks a bit like I don't know, some sort of monster, okay, or a rubber glove, I don't know. These type 2s are slightly different. They have a square shape, so they are not as efficient. Surface area to volume ratio is not as good. And what they do is they produce a chemical called a surfactant. And what the surfactant does is it reduces surface tension. Okay, so it basically stops this alveoli from collapsing in on itself. Okay, it's like a secretion, it's a layer. Okay, and it's really important because otherwise this whole sac could just collapse in. So these produce a surfactant. Also, if needs be, these type 2 cells can adapt and turn into type 1 cells. So they're pretty cool. This here is a capillary. Okay, so this is your blood running by the side. Okay, and again, notice it's one cell thick. One cell thick. Okay, again, to make diffusion super quick. Okay, this thing here, biconcave disc, is a red blood cell. Also known as erythrocyte. Okay, so type 2 produces surfactant. Type 1 are for quick diffusion or gas exchange. Right, so let's just write a few little notes in at the bottom just so remember. So remember, IB love form and function. So the form, structure or form, okay, and function. So these are thin. We call them squamous cells. They're adapted to have with high surface area to volume ratio. In other words, they're long and thin, and adapted with a high surface area to volume ratio. And I always put ration. Can't help myself. Okay, so what's his job? Well, its function is it's the surface across which gas exchange happens. Across which gas exchange occurs via diffusion. So remember, there's no energy required. So that's your type 1s. Your type 2s, on the other hand, different shape completely. Remember, they're cuboid. So they have a lower surface area to volume ratio. To volume ratio. Okay, you can see that. Their job is to produce a chemical surfactant. Okay, so they produce oh golly gosh, a chemical surfactant to reduce the surface area, the surface tension. So to reduce surface tension and prevent the collapse of the alveoli. Alveoli. Bonus, they can divide to become type 1s, if needs be. Okay, so far so good. So that's our alveoli, and in a minute we're going to learn how to draw one. Okay, so let's do some final little roundup notes. Here we go. Final thing. Right then, so ventilation, that means breathing. The actual mechanical movement of air into and out of the body. Okay, so ventilation means the actual getting the air in and getting it out. Okay, it's not gas exchange. Okay, that's different. Okay, gas exchange is the actual jumping over the alveolar wall. Ventilation is a mechanical means of getting the air in and then breathing out. So let's have a look what it says. It says gas exchange is the uptake of molecular oxygen, O2, from the environment and the discharge of carbon dioxide, CO2, to the environment. This process is distinct, so different from, but linked to the production of ATP. So think about it, right? Breathing gets the oxygen in that we need for ATP, but it isn't cellular respiration. Okay, it's just the means or the mechanical means of getting the oxygen in. Right then, so it says something is the metabolic process. Well, what's that? That's going to be cellular respiration. So they're linked, but they're not the same thing. Cellular respiration is a metabolic process in cells that uses oxygen and produces carbon dioxide to produce ATP. Gas exchange this is diffusion of gases, carbon dioxide and CO2 across a respiratory membrane. Okay, so remember, let's see, I'll do this in a minute. Oxygen diffuses from the air into the lungs into the blood. Carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood into the air and into the lungs. In addition, gas exchange occurs in where? Well, it happens in the membrane, but it also goes in the capillaries. I can't spell. 1 P, 2 L's. Capillaries in the tissues. So oxygen from the blood in the capillaries diffuses out into the cells, and then carbon dioxide diffuses from the cells into the capillaries. So it's a two-way street. Okay, so let's see. Well, gas exchange, why do we do it? Well, why is because we have to do cellular respiration. So this is a why. Okay. Why do we do cellular respiration? To produce ATP. Okay. Where does this cellular respiration happen? Well, it happens in the cells. So, where does it happen? It happens in the cells. What is cellular respiration? It's a metabolic process. Our cells, okay, if it's in the cytoplasm, it's anaerobic. Remember? In cytoplasm. Okay, but aerobic in the mitochondria. So it needs the oxygen. Aerobic in mitochondria. Okay, how about gas exchange? Well, where does it happen? It happens in the respiratory membrane, alveoli. So where? What's it for? It's for the diffusion of gases. Where else does this gas exchange happen? It also happens in the capillaries. Okay, so far so okay. Now in humans, I'm going to move this up a little bit, hope you can see it. Leave it right there. Now in humans, gas exchange happens by diffusion. No energy required. And it happens at the alveoli and the capillaries. What do we need for this to happen? Well, we must have a concentration gradient. So must have a concentration gradient. Okay, and the larger, the faster they move. Let's see. Pumping air, as in mammals, or water, as in fish, across a gas exchange surface helps maintain the concentration gradient. This process is called what? What do we call it getting it in and out? It's called ventilation. Okay, why do we do ventilation? So we can get gas exchange. Oops, wrong pen. What is ventilation? Okay, it's helped maintain this gradient, because if we don't have the gradient, then we won't get diffusion. Where does ventilation happen? In the lungs. So in other words, ventilation is the pumping of air or breathing. Okay, last little tiny bit. Okay, so here we have our sophisticated diagram of our alveoli. This is the bronchiole. And this is air in. And this is air out. Okay, this here, each one of these is an alveoli. Okay, can you see each one of these air sacs? Okay, so this is lots of alveoli. Okay, here you can see all these bloodworks. There's a network of capillaries. because this is where the gas exchange is going to occur between the alveoli and the capillaries, the blood. Let's see, what else do we need to know? This one here, that would be 1 alveolus. Okay, so remember, this is important. Our last little bit. The whole point of this is respiration happens to make ATP. Ventilation is the mechanical means of getting air in and out. In other words, breathing. Okay, so in our next video, I'm going to show you how to easily draw one of these diagrams. Hope that was fun.